The air in the main tactical operations center of Forward Operating Base Dagger was a thick, unappetizing soup. It was a concoction of scents and sensations that clung to the back of the throat. The acrid tang of ozone from overstressed electronics, the pervasive, gritty sweetness of airborne sand that had defeated every filter, the faint but stubborn ghost of stale coffee, and the low, oppressive hum of industrial-grade air conditioners fighting a losing war against the Afghan sun. The light was artificial, a sterile, shadowless fluorescence that bleached the color from the fatigues of the men and women who moved with the tired, economical purpose of the permanently deployed. This place was a nerve center, a bubble of hyper-advanced technology and American military might stitched crudely onto the flank of a hostile, ancient landscape. It was a place of immense power and profound vulnerability, a fact felt by everyone who breathed its recycled air, though few ever spoke of it. It was a world unto itself, governed by rank, ritual, and the unwritten codes of survival. In a corner of this humming, climate-controlled cavern, away from the central dais where maps glowed on massive screens and communications officers murmured into headsets, sat a woman. She was an island of stillness in a river of controlled chaos. To the casual observer, she was utterly unremarkable, a void in a room designed for immediate assessment of threat and value. Her uniform was a standard operational camouflage pattern, but it was devoid of any insignia. No name tape, no rank, no unit patch. It was as anonymous as the gray steel chair she occupied. Her hair was a nondescript brown, pulled back in a severe, functional bun that emphasized the plainness of her features. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, save for a simple, ruggedized watch on her wrist. She could have been in her late 20s or her early 40s. Her face, scrubbed clean and seemingly placid, offered no clues. She was not reading a report or staring at a screen. She was simply watching, her gaze sweeping the room with a slow, methodical rhythm. Her posture relaxed, but not slumped, a study in energy conservation. In a place where everyone was broadcasting their importance through shouted commands, crisp salutes, or the sheer kinetic energy of their stress. Her silence was a strange, dissonant note. She was a puzzle nobody felt compelled to solve, a piece of background scenery. Into this carefully managed ecosystem of stress and procedure strode Brigadier General Marcus Madsen. He did not so much walk as he did conquer the space before him. Madsen was a man freshly acquainted with his first star, and he wore it not as a responsibility, but as a crown. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself, all sharp angles and a jaw that seemed permanently set for a confrontation. His uniform was impossibly crisp, his boots polished to a black mirror finish that seemed to defy the ubiquitous dust. Authority did not just cling to him, it radiated from him like heat from a furnace, a manufactured aura of command that demanded acknowledgement. He moved through the operations center like a shark patrolling a reef, his eyes scanning for any sign of weakness, any deviation from the perfection he demanded. His retinue, a nervous gaggle of a major and 2 captains, trailed in his wake, their expressions a mixture of terror and reflected glory. Madsen's tour of the facility was less an inspection and more a performance. He found fault with the angle of a monitor, the volume of a radio check, the infinitesimal scuff on a lieutenant's boot. Each correction was delivered in a booming voice designed to carry, to remind everyone present that a god had descended from the higher echelons to walk among them. His gaze, sweeping across his domain, eventually fell upon the quiet corner, upon the still, anonymous woman. He stopped. The sudden cessation of his movement caused his aides to nearly collide behind him. A frown creased his brow. In his meticulously ordered world, she was an anomaly, a variable he could not account for. Unmarked uniform, no discernible task, utterly placid. To his mind, which processed the world through a rigid filter of hierarchy and purpose, she was an error in the system. He altered his course, his polished boots thudding on the raised metal flooring with deliberate weight. The hum of the room seemed to quieten as people sensed the shift in the general's focus. A predator had selected its prey. He came to a halt before her table, casting a long shadow over her. She did not immediately look up, her gaze completing its slow, methodical sweep of the far wall before finally, unhurriedly, rising to meet his. Her eyes were a cool, clear gray, and they held his without a flicker of intimidation or deference. They were simply observant. "And what precisely are you supposed to be?" Madsen's voice was not a question. It was a weapon, a tool of condescension honed over a career of intimidating subordinates. The "you" was stretched, laden with implication. You, the civilian. You, the woman. You, the thing that does not belong in my world. The woman did not react. There was no startle, no flush of embarrassment, no nervous shifting. Her stillness, which had been passive, now became an active force, a shield. She considered his question for a moment, as if it were a technical query requiring a precise answer. "I am where I am required to be," she said. Her voice was calm, level, and devoid of any emotional inflection. It was the voice of a person stating a fact, like announcing the time or the temperature. The simplicity and confidence of her answer seemed to infuriate Madsen. He had expected a stammered explanation, a fumbling for an identification card, an immediate display of submission. Her refusal to play her assigned role in his little drama was a direct challenge to his authority. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on her small table, invading her personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne was a bizarre intrusion in the sterile air of the command center. "That wasn't the question," he growled, his voice dropping into a more personal, menacing register. "I see no rank. I see no name. I see a woman who looks more suited to a university library than a forward combat zone. So I will ask you again. Who are you? And who gave you permission to be in my operations center?" He glanced around at the assembled staff, a small, smug smile playing on his lips. He was making a point. This was a demonstration of his control, his absolute dominion over this space. The woman's gaze dropped from his eyes to his hands on her table, then back up. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible motion, but it was weighted with a meaning he could not decipher. It felt strangely like a dismissal, like she was evaluating a minor, irrelevant detail. "My presence here was authorized by the Joint Chiefs," she stated, again with that unnerving, factual calm. She did not elaborate. She did not offer a name or a title. She simply presented a fact, as solid and unadorned as a block of granite. The mention of the Joint Chiefs was a spark on gunpowder. For Madsen, it was the height of insolence. A nameless, rankless woman invoking the highest authority in the military was not just insubordination. It was a fantasy, a pathetic attempt to shield herself. He laughed, a short, ugly bark that echoed in the now silent room. "The Joint Chiefs? Is that so?" He sneered, straightening up and crossing his arms. "I suppose they call you personally, do they? On a special, secret phone." He looked at her, his eyes running down her form in a deliberately insulting appraisal. "Let me be clear. I am the commanding officer of this installation. Nothing happens here without my knowledge. No one sits in my command center without my approval. You are a civilian contractor, a journalist, or God knows what else, and you have wandered into a place where you are not welcome. Your looks might get you past the guards at the gate, sweetheart, but they don't get you a seat at this table. His words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The insult was blatant, a crude mixture of sexism and a raw assertion of power. The onlookers shifted uncomfortably. They knew the general was overstepping, but he was a general. She was a nobody. The math of the situation was simple and brutal. No one would intervene. The woman did not flinch. She did not turn. Her expression remained unchanged, a mask of serene neutrality. It was like watching a jackal snap and snarl at a lioness, and the lioness refusing to even acknowledge its existence. Her utter lack of reaction was more infuriating to Madsen than any shouted retort could have been. He had used his most potent weapons, his rank, his voice, his scorn, and they had impacted her with all the force of a handful of dust thrown against a fortress wall. He felt his face flush with anger. He had intended to make an example of her, and instead, she was making a fool of him through her sheer, impossible composure. He took another step closer, his body language screaming aggression. "Stand up when I am speaking to you," he commanded, his voice a low thunder. "You will identify yourself to me right now, or I will have you escorted to a holding cell until you remember your manners." It was then that the world ended. The end began not with a bang, but with a flicker. The main overhead lights in the Tactical Operations Center blinked once, twice, and then died, plunging the room into the eerie twilight of emergency backup lighting and the glow of 100 computer screens. A single, piercing alarm tone began to shriek, a sound that cut through the low hum and chatter, a digital scream of pure panic. On the main strategic map, a massive, vibrant display showing friendly and enemy positions across the sector. The neat blue icons representing their own forces began to jitter and then vanish one by one, like stars being snuffed out. Red icons, hostile markers, began to bloom in their place, not in enemy territory, but inside their own perimeter. It was impossible. It was a digital ghost invasion. "What in God's name is that?" Madsen roared, spinning away from the woman to face the board. His manufactured authority was instantly replaced by genuine, panicked confusion. "Report! Someone get me a sit rep now!" The communications officer at the main console was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he tapped at his keyboard. "Sir, I don't know. We're losing contact with our drone fleet. The network it's not responding. All data feeds are corrupting. It's gibberish, sir. It's like the entire system is having a stroke." Panic, a cold and greasy thing, began to spread through the room. This was not a conventional attack. There was no sound of mortars, no rumble of an explosion. This was deeper, more insidious. It was an assault on their senses, on the very nervous system of the base. They were being blinded, deafened, and paralyzed from the inside out. A technician shouted from across the room, his voice tight with fear. "Sir, the perimeter defenses are going offline. The automated turrets are failing their system checks. We're being ghosted." Madsen was a product of a physical world. He understood troop movements, artillery trajectories, and supply lines. This was a foreign language, a form of warfare he couldn't see or shoot. His response was instinctual and utterly wrong. "Get me a hard line to the motor pool. I want a quick reaction force mobilized. Double the guard on all sectors," he bellowed, his orders loud but useless, a man shouting at a tidal wave. He was trying to solve a surgical problem with a sledgehammer. His aides scrambled to relay his commands, adding to the noise and confusion, but achieving nothing. The red icons on the board continued to multiply, a digital cancer consuming their reality. In the midst of this rising tide of chaos, the woman stood up. Her movement was not hurried. It was fluid and deliberate, an act of pure, distilled purpose that cut through the frantic energy of the room. She pushed her chair back neatly under the table and began to walk toward the central command dais. She moved with a strange grace, her steps silent and sure on the metal floor. The panicked men and women of the command staff barely registered her passage, their attention locked on their dying screens. She was still an anonymous figure, but her anonymity was no longer one of passivity. It was now the anonymity of a professional, a specialist, moving toward her work. She arrived at the primary communications console, where the young officer was frantically trying to input commands that the system was rejecting. She did not speak to him. She simply placed a hand gently on his shoulder. He looked up, startled, his face a mask of sweat and fear. "Stand up," she said. Her voice was the same calm, level tone she had used with Madsen, but it was now imbued with an undeniable and absolute authority. It was not a request. It was a command wrapped in the guise of a suggestion. Confused, but responding to the sheer certainty in her voice, the officer pushed his chair back and rose. The woman slid into the seat. For a moment, she simply looked at the screen, her gray eyes scanning the cascading lines of corrupt data and error messages. Her face was a study in intense concentration. The chaos of the room, Madsen's continued shouting, the shrieking alarm, it all seemed to fade away, to become irrelevant background noise to the silent, furious battle she was about to join. Her hands hovered over the keyboard for a second, her fingers splayed, and then they descended. What followed was not typing. It was a form of music, a symphony of logic and command played at an impossible tempo. Her fingers danced across the keys, a blur of motion that seemed too fast for a human being. The screen, which had been a waterfall of red error messages, went black. A single green cursor pulsed in the void. A new language began to appear, a language of pure code, of raw machine instructions, flowing from her fingertips onto the screen. It was a language no one in the room, not even the most skilled technicians, could fully comprehend. It was dense, elegant, and brutally efficient. She began to speak, her voice cutting cleanly through the din. It was not directed at any one person, but at the room itself, and it demanded obedience. Isolate the primary server grid from the external network. Now. Physical disconnect if you have to. I want a full packet capture from node Delta 9, time-stamped to the initial anomaly. Kill the satellite uplink. All of it. We are going dark. Her orders were complex, technical, and delivered with the speed of thought. The senior network engineer, a grizzled master sergeant, stared at her for a half-second, his mind struggling to process the fact that this unknown woman was issuing commands that superseded the general's. But there was no questioning the expertise in her voice. He saw a lifeline. He began to move. "You heard her. Go, go!" he yelled to his subordinates. The woman's attention was already back on the screen. "I need a direct shielded line to the STRATCOM Cyber Command node at Peterson. Tell them to open a listen-only channel on Protocol 7. My authorization is Thanatos-01. The name hit the room like a physical blow. Thanatos-01. It was not a standard call sign. It sounded like something from a spy novel, a piece of mythology. But the master sergeant, who had been in the signals intelligence world for 20 years, froze in his tracks. His eyes widened in dawning, horrified comprehension. He had heard whispers of those designations, ghost codes used by entities that did not officially exist. Madsen, seeing his authority being completely and utterly usurped, stormed toward the console. "Who in the hell do you think you are? I am in command here. I give the orders." The woman did not even turn to look at him. Her eyes remained locked on the screen, her fingers a continuous blur. "General," she said, her voice sharp, clinical, and utterly dismissive. "You are a passenger on an aircraft that is falling out of the sky. I am the only person on board who knows how to fly. I suggest you return to your seat and stow your tray table." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the statement left Madsen speechless. The entire room was now watching her. They were watching a master at work. On the main screen, which she now controlled, a complex, three-dimensional representation of the base's network architecture appeared. A pulsing red virus, a digital predator, was moving through it, consuming and corrupting everything it touched. And a single, brilliant blue line, controlled by her, was moving to intercept it. She was building firewalls out of raw code, setting traps in dead-end subroutines, and hunting the hostile intruder through the labyrinth of their own systems. She was not just defending, she was attacking. It was a masterclass in cyber warfare, a brutal, elegant, and lightning-fast campaign fought in a dimension they could barely perceive. The room was silent, save for the furious clicking of her keyboard and her occasional clipped commands. They were no longer soldiers and technicians in a command center. They were spectators at an Olympian event, witnessing a level of skill so profound it bordered on the supernatural. The Master Sergeant finally managed to get a shielded line established, bypassing the compromised main systems. A face appeared on a secondary monitor beside the woman. It was an old man, his face a roadmap of sleepless nights and heavy decisions. He wore the 4 stars of a full general on his collar. It was General Wallace, the commander of United States Strategic Command, one of the most powerful military figures on the planet. His expression was grim. "This is Stratcom Actual," he said, his voice gravelly with tension. "We're tracking a polymorphic attack propagating through the entire CENTCOM network. It originated in your sector. Fob Dagger, what is your status? We've been blind for 7 minutes." Madsen, seeing his chance to reassert himself, lunged for the microphone. "General Wallace, this is Brigadier General Madsen. We are under some kind of digital assault. The situation is—" Before he could finish, Wallace's eyes flickered past him, locking onto the woman at the console. The grim tension in his face did not just vanish. It was replaced by a wave of palpable, profound relief. A man who carried the weight of the world's nuclear arsenal on his shoulders looked as if he had just seen an angel. "Dr. Thorne," Wallace breathed, his voice filled with a reverence that stunned everyone in the room. He did not address Madsen. He spoke directly to her, his tone that of a subordinate speaking to a revered superior. "Ariadne, we saw the breach but were locked out. We couldn't stop it. What's your status? What do you need?" The name. Ariadne. It was not a name. It was a designation, a legend, a ghost story whispered in the highest echelons of global intelligence. Ariadne was not a person, but a program, a mythical figure, the architect of the nation's entire cyber defense doctrine, the one who had designed the very systems they used, and the only one who knew their deepest secrets, their fatal flaws. Ariadne was the final failsafe, the ghost in the machine that was only ever unleashed when the world was on fire. Madsen froze. his mouth half open, the blood drained from his face. He stared at the unassuming woman, her plain face illuminated by the glow of the screen. He saw her, truly saw her, for the first time. As she leaned forward, her fingers still flying across the keyboard, the collar of her simple uniform shifted slightly, and there, on the nape of her neck, just below her hairline, was a small tattoo. It was an intricate, stylized labyrinth, a maze of black ink, and running through the center of the maze was a single, unbroken thread of crimson. It was the symbol, the mark of the Minotaur program, the personal signifier of its creator. The intruder is a state-sponsored entity, using a zero-day exploit in the drone control firmware, Dr. Thorne reported to Wallace, her voice as calm as if she were discussing the weather. I've contained it within a sandboxed partition. It thinks it's still consuming our network, but it's feeding on ghost data. I'm currently backtracing its origin point. I should have a physical location for you in 90 seconds. General Wallace simply nodded, his expression one of complete trust. The network is yours, Ariadne. We'll stand by. Madsen did not move. He could not move. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion, shame, and a new, rising terror that was colder and deeper than any fear he had ever known on a battlefield. The woman he had mocked, the sweetheart he had threatened, the anonymous figure he had tried to humiliate to bolster his own fragile ego, was a legend. She was not just above his pay grade. She operated in a different reality, on a plane of importance he could not even conceive of. He had not just insulted a superior officer. He had stood in a temple and spat on the altar in front of the god herself. The silence in the room was now a heavy, suffocating blanket of judgment, and every eye was on him. With a final, triumphant series of keystrokes, Dr. Thorne leaned back in the chair. On the main screen, the raging red virus collapsed in on itself and vanished. The blue icons of their friendly forces reappeared, steady and solid. The shrieking alarm cut off, replaced by the familiar, comforting hum of the fully operational center. A set of coordinates flashed on the screen. "General Wallace," she said, her voice still utterly calm. "There is your target. A satellite uplink facility disguised as a commercial data farm. I've taken the liberty of leaving them a little present. When their operators next attempt a network intrusion, their entire system will permanently erase itself. I estimate you have a 60-minute window before they realize they've been compromised and attempt to scrub their physical location." "Understood, Ariadne. We'll take it from here," Wallace replied, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Well done. As always." His image winked out, the screen going black. Dr. Thorne, now Heiress Thorne in the minds of everyone present, slowly rose from the chair. The crisis was over. The silence that remained was profound. She turned, her cool gray eyes sweeping over the stunned faces of the command staff, and finally, they came to rest on Brigadier General Marcus Madsen. He stood as if turned to stone, his face a pale, waxy mask. She walked toward him, her steps once again unhurried and silent. She stopped a few feet away, creating a circle of empty space around them that no one dared to enter. The entire command center, a room full of hardened soldiers, held its collective breath. They were about to witness a reckoning. "General," she began, her voice soft but carrying in the stillness. It was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was the voice of a diagnostician explaining a fatal disease. "Today, you demonstrated a critical failure in threat assessment. Your operational methodology is flawed at a fundamental level." Madsen flinched as if struck. Her clinical analysis was 1,000 times more devastating than any shouted insult could have been. You process the world through a filter of superficial indicators, she continued, her gaze unwavering. Rank, gender, appearance. You use these metrics to assign value and determine threat. Your prejudice is not a personal failing, General. It is a tactical vulnerability. It is a gaping hole in your defensive perimeter. Today, you mistook a strategic asset for a non-combatant. You attempted to neutralize a friendly force based on its container, not its contents. What if the threat had been a hostile operative disguised as a cook or a technician? Your system of evaluation would have missed it completely. You are blind, General. You are blind to the realities of modern warfare. Each word was a precisely placed scalpel, cutting away at the foundations of his career, his identity, his pride. He had no defense. He could offer no argument. He had been so comprehensively, so utterly proven wrong that there was nothing left for him to do but stand there and accept the verdict. Your actions did not insult me, she stated, a subtle but crucial distinction. My ego is not a factor in my operational parameters. Your actions, however, endangered this entire installation. While you were occupied with asserting your dominance over an unarmed woman, a hostile entity was dismantling your defenses. Your focus was internal, on the petty politics of this room, while the real war was happening on a battlefield you didn't even know existed. You were a liability. The final word, liability, hung in the air, a death sentence for a military career. Madsen finally found his voice, a choked, broken whisper. Dr. Thorne, I apologize, I had no idea. That is the entire point, General, she replied, her voice remaining devoid of heat. You had no idea, and you made no attempt to acquire the relevant data before acting. You assumed. Assumption is the mother of catastrophe. She paused, letting the weight of her judgment settle over him. The room was so quiet that the faint buzz of a single fluorescent light was audible. General Wallace has granted me operational discretion in this matter, she said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming even more formal. A court-martial would be a simple solution. It would remove you from command. But it would not fix the underlying problem. The problem is your perspective, and perspective can only be corrected through education. A flicker of hope, or perhaps just fresh terror, passed through Madsen's eyes. Therefore, she declared, you will not be relieved of command, not officially. However, for the remainder of my deployment at this facility, you are assigned to me. You will be my executive aide. You will carry my equipment. You will fetch my coffee. You will sit in every briefing I conduct, and you will take notes. You will observe. You will listen. You will learn to see the difference between a person's appearance and their capabilities. Your re-education begins now, General. Your first task is to get me a bottle of water. No ice. She turned her back on him then, a final, complete dismissal. She walked back to her quiet corner, sat down in her chair, and resumed her placid observation of the room, as if nothing at all had happened. She was once again an island of stillness, but now everyone saw her for what she was. She was not an absence of power. She was the very center of it, a quiet, unassuming vortex around which their entire world now revolved. For a long moment, Brigadier General Marcus Madsen stood frozen in the center of the room. A one-star general, a man of immense pride, had just been publicly and comprehensively humbled, reduced to the status of an errand boy. He could refuse. He could protest. It would mean the end of his career, a disgraceful exit under a cloud of shame. Or he could accept. He could endure the humiliation, the whispers, the stares. He could drink the poison of his own arrogance and hope to find an antidote in the process. Slowly, stiffly, as if his joints were rusted, he turned. He walked past the stunned faces of his aides and the silent command staff, his mirrored boots seeming to mock him with every step. He walked to the small kitchenette at the back of the operations center, took a bottle of water from the cooler, and began the long, quiet walk back to Dr. Thorne's table. The story of that day became a legend within the sealed world of military intelligence. It was called The Humbling of Madsen, or more poetically, Ariadne's Lesson. It was passed down from one generation of officers to the next, not as gossip, but as a formal teaching tool, a modern military fable. The details were often embellished. In some versions, Madsen wept. In others, Dr. Thorne levitated. But the core truth of the story remained a powerful and immutable lesson. It became a cautionary tale about the mortal danger of assumption, a stark reminder that in the complex, asymmetrical battlefields of the new century, the most dangerous weapon might not be the one that makes the loudest noise, but the one you never see coming at all. Years later, at the National Defense University in Washington, a guest lecturer stood before an auditorium of the nation's brightest young colonels and naval captains. He was an older man now, his hair gray, his face lined with a wisdom that had been purchased at a very high price. He had retired as a major general, a surprising and impressive end to a career that many had thought was over that day in Afghanistan. He was Marcus Madsen, and he was widely considered one of the most insightful instructors on the subject of modern warfare and leadership. He never failed to tell the story of his time as Dr. Aris Thorne's aide. He told it without ego, without shame, presenting his own past arrogance and prejudice with a brutal, unflinching honesty. He described the weeks he spent in her shadow, watching her work, listening to her deconstruct complex geopolitical problems with the same cool logic she had used to deconstruct him. He learned to see the world not as a hierarchy of uniforms, but as a complex system of assets and threats, where value was determined by competence, not by appearance. He learned, as he put it, to see. She was the most formidable human being I have ever met, he would tell his students, his voice quiet and filled with a genuine, lasting awe. And she looked like a librarian. She taught me that true authority is not projected. It is demonstrated. It is not worn on a collar. It is proven in a crisis. Your greatest strength as a leader will not be your voice in a quiet room, but your calm in a storm. And your greatest weakness, the one that will kill you and everyone under your command, is the certainty that you already know all the answers. He always ended his lecture the same way. He would project an image onto the large screen behind him. It was a simple, stark graphic, an intricate labyrinth with a single thread running through its center. "Look for the quiet ones," he would say, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the future leaders of the armed forces. "Seek out the people who do not advertise their own value. They are the ones who are truly confident in their abilities. They let their actions be their argument. Find them. Listen to them. Empower them. Because in the final analysis, the person who saves you will not be the one who looks the part. It will be the one who knows what to do when the lights go out." The story of Dr. Thorne and General Madsen thus transcended the individuals involved. It became part of the institution's living memory, a moralistic touchstone. It served as a powerful allegory for a military, and indeed a world, grappling with change. It was a lesson that the old metrics of power, physical strength, loud commands, rigid hierarchies, were becoming increasingly irrelevant. The new currencies were information, intellect, and the quiet, unnerving competence of the hidden master. True strength did not need to boast. Its presence was felt, its results undeniable. Hubris, the story taught, was a self-inflicted wound, while humility was the armor of the wise. And in the quiet corners of the world, in the unassuming figures who simply watch and wait, lies a power greater than any army, waiting for the moment it is required to act.